Hey, hello everybody, welcome back to the channel, welcome to my shed and welcome to a new project. Truth be told, I need a new project like I need another hole in my head, and yet here we are. I broke with two of my important rules, the first being never start a new project unless your last project is completely finished, and the second rule is I will never ever restore a Honda SS50 again. So, why are we here? Well, let me explain, because this project has a little bit of a family history. I will include chapters in the description box, so if you want to skip ahead and go right into the action, please use the chapters. And if you like my jibber jabber, well, you can put me on repeat. The bike or motorcycle in question is my brother's bike. To clarify, legally this is a moped or a brommer in Dutch with a limited cylinder capacity of 49 cc, a limited top speed of 45 kilometers an hour, but for the sake of clarity and brevity I'm gonna call it a bike or motorcycle. It's my brother's bike, and he got this as a gift from our parents when he was 16 and when he passed his high school exams. My brother and I were really into those Honda bikes back in the day because, well, we liked the design and the fact that they had a 4-stroke engine. These bikes has always been very rare in the Netherlands. They sold in very small numbers because most people wanted a 2-stroke bike from the German manufacturers or from Yamaha, for instance, and these Honda bikes, they were very rare. And that's why we liked them, because every man and his dog was riding a 2-stroke scooter back in the day. But since they were sold in such small numbers, they were pretty hard to find. My brother and I regularly looked into the papers and into the ads. This was the pre-internet era, to find a bike, but we were never lucky. As luck would have it, during my study I ended up working at the ICT department of a large company, and I had access to the early internet, where we had the early forums and marketplace. That helped me to find a Honda forum for these 4-stroke bikes. I could find workshop manuals and a lot of technical information, and I learned that there were shops in the Netherlands specialized in these bikes, but they weren't really close by. We went to one of those specialist shops, and my brother picked this bike. It's a special edition one because of the fuel tank on it. It's a so-called Jubilee tank, and Honda had those made in the Netherlands because they needed to get rid of the old batch of 4-stroke bikes, because the newer 2-stroke MT and MB models were coming in. So that makes this bike a little bit extra special. When the bike was bought by my dad, we could pick it up a week later, and I was the lucky one to drive it home, and that was quite a false start because the bike didn't run as it should. And instead of going back to the shop that sold us, I didn't even consider warranty and such. Rode it home, barely made it home, and well, within the first week my brother and I started working on it with a workshop manual that I was able to download. And we went from a bike that would barely go 40 kilometers an hour with tailwind to a bike that would easily go 60 kilometers with the both of us on it. I adjusted the ignition, the carburetor, and these bikes had a retarding mechanism in the flywheel to retard the timing, because God forbid these bikes went any faster than 40 kilometers an hour, because the police in the Netherlands would seize your bike. But when you fix that, the bike would go significantly faster. To cut a long story real short, a couple of months later I bought my first bike, did my first restorations. My brother's bike was later converted within the first year to a 72cc setup. We got our hands on a big bore kit with a matching cylinder head, so with a larger combustion chamber, larger valves, and a faster camshaft, and that turned the bike into the monster that it still is to this day. To make matters worse, my brother also bought the loudest exhaust that he could buy, so we could hear him 5 minutes before he got home. So it has its pros and cons, but the word obnoxious is invented for that exhaust. It is extremely loud. So why are we here? A couple of months ago our son came to me and he said, well, I'm kind of fed up with bicycling to school, and he said, well, maybe I want a little bike for the future. And his idea was to buy a cheap one, then fix it up together with me, father and son project, and by the time he was 16 he could go and ride that bike. So we sat down, looked on the internet, and I started looking at scooters and such, but then he said, everyone has a scooter, don't want a scooter. And well, we looked at other bikes, and then he said, no, I want something that resembles a real motorcycle, so more like my Mesh. But he also figured out that the Mesh would be too large and too heavy for him. He's not the tallest. So we started looking at these old Honda bikes, but I knew that, yeah, him and I couldn't afford it. But he said, well, that's something that I would like to have. Those are real nice bikes. And he knew my old Honda from a couple of years ago. Well, you can see where this is going. I knew that my brother didn't ride his bike much, if any, for the last couple of years. So I contacted my brother and explained the situation, and he said, well, I had put it up for sale but immediately pulled the ad for two reasons. First one being it's a gift from our parents, and the second is he had it for all 25 years. But on the other hand, he thought, well, it's going to waste. It really started to rust and yeah, wasn't getting any better in his shed. So we made a deal. It was a win-win situation. I had a decent bike for a decent price, and my brother was very happy to keep it in the family. This bike is intended as the bike for our son. This restoration won't be cheap. So with that little bit of backstory, I want to tell what we are working with. So when we sealed the deal, I went to his house, I picked up the bike, and we pulled it out of his shed. The fuel in the tank was almost 10 years old, and there was some oil in the engine. So what I always do before starting a bike, I slowly kick on the kickstarter to prime the oil system so it doesn't have a dry start. But little did my brother and I knew that the key was in the ignition and it was on. And at the first movement of the kickstarter, it fired right up, came to a smooth idle, very low idle, and the exhaust being really loud. It made a real nice, impressive thumping sound, and that's how I remember the bike. I drove it home. I could tell that the clutch was slipping. It was burning oil. It smelled quite a bit, and also, yeah, you could really feel it needed maintenance. The brakes were worn, and then the steering wasn't what it was supposed to be. So I already decided to take the bike completely apart. But before I did it, our son rode a bike. He was very enthusiastic about the bike, but he was imitated by the power, the speed and the noise it made. And yeah, since this bike is technically illegal because it was way too fast and the engine is way too large, we decided to convert the bike back to 49cc because the engine needed a rebuild anyway. And also our son decided that he wanted to change the color. Well, I figured, well, if you take it completely apart, it's a good time to go and spray paint it. But as I said, it had a very special edition paint, at least the fuel tank. But I discovered the fuel tank was leaking and the paint was badly damaged. On the rear section of the fuel tank there was a dent, you could see, and it was filled up with filler and it was painted over. But it wasn't nice, and you could see that the filler was swelling up, so there was a leak in the fuel tank. I'll show you in a second. So I decided to take it apart, and I had the frame and the rear swing arm and a lot of other parts sandblasted. And then the sandblaster called me and he said, well, the frame isn't looking all too bad, but that rear swing arm is toast. I have it here, by the way, so I can show you. The bike was restored. It was powder coated, and the big negative, the big downside of powder coat is things can start to rust under the powder coat. You don't see anything of it until you see it, and then it's too late. Now, I always thought that this swing arm was in good condition, but I'm going to show you in close up. You look at this section over here, there's all kinds of holes in there, and it's worse over here where it's completely rusted out. And not sure if the camera will pick this up, but there are thick wells over here. So it has never been a well restored bike. It was a, this is really a hack job. But if you apply a lot of powder coat, it looks nice, and if it looks well, it flies well. But I think for the last 25 years that my brother has owned this bike, the structural integrity of that swing arm was non-existent. This is really dangerous. In the meantime, I've taken the bike completely apart. As I said, this was intended as a father-son project, and I figured that our son wouldn't be on camera. So I started taking everything apart. Everything is scattered around in the shed over here in parts. I've done metal work. I've sourced a new swing arm, and I started painting. all of that is well post-fact. So basically this will be a reassembly of a Honda SS50 series of videos. As I said, the engine needed a rebuild. Mentioned earlier on, parts are so expensive. Rebuilding the engine and convert it to 49cc would cost around 400 euros. And this Leafhan clone engine cost me 280 euros. And if you look up close, you can also see that this is a semi-automatic. This is a 4-speed, let me put it down, semi-automatic transmission, because it came to mind that in the past I had rebuilt a bike for a young guy, and he had difficulty with the shifting and clutching and observing traffic, and our son is kind of the same, so I figured it would make sense to have a semi-automatic, so he doesn't have to pull the clutch to come to a full stop in case of an emergency, because when our son rode a bike, that constantly happened. He came to a stop, let go of the clutch while it was in gear, and with these semi-automatics you can perform an emergency stop or just be on the brakes, forget about the clutch, but the engine will not stall. So that's why we chose that. Okay, enough jibber jabber, let's go have a look at the work that has already been done. Finally. So most of the parts I have already prepared off camera, done most of the painting, but some parts of this restoration I want to film and especially provide you with useful tips. So let me start off by one of the most important things, if not the most important part, the brakes. And this is the front brake, and this in itself, well, does the majority of the braking. I have painted the back plate, or it's also called the anchor plate over here. Now what do you need to look for? Well, most important thing to know is that this back plate is aluminium and this little lever over here that operates the brake is steel. Two things are very important and that are often overlooked. Every now and then you have to take this apart and lubricate this arm over here, this pivot point of the brake. That needs to be lubricated, and of course those little sections over here where the brake shoes rest on need to be lubricated, as is this pivot point. And be careful not to use an excessive amount of brake or grease, because it can get on the brake shoes, and it's easy to imagine what happens. So that's why I'm replacing the old brake shoes. I'm not sure if the camera will focus on this here, but there over here, there it is the HM mark. So these are the original Honda brakes. I think they are replacements already, but they are originally Honda. But when you look at the surface, you can see it's shiny and it's fairly black, and that's because it's saturated with a greasy compound. And this is how it should look like. And you can sand this down a little bit, and then you should have the same appearance as this over here. But these are just drenched in grease. There was an excessive amount of grease in there, so I have to throw this away. So that's what you have to keep in mind. It's not just that this has to be lubricated, but also it has to be a fairly tight fit. What can happen if that the grease dries out, or if there is no grease in here, you get the galvanic corrosion, and after a period of time it just freezes up. If you squeeze the brake lever, it cracks loose oftentimes, but after that it either doesn't return to its rest position, its zero position, or the brakes start binding because this doesn't want to rotate freely. That's very important to keep in mind. And also this has to be nice and round, nice tight fit. And that brings me to the rear brake, which has the exact same construction, and this is the old brake, the rear brake. But if you look up close, you can see that this hole for the pivot point is completely oval. And when I put this in here, now this is for the front one, but sorry, let me get the right one. This is the pivot for this one, but this is, you can see it's wobbling in there, and it has so much play. I can rotate it in circles. So yeah, you could push either a sleeve in here and remachine this surface, make it this slightly smaller in diameter and have a sleeve in here. But what I did, I got a new or a replacement one, and this has a much nicer fit, and now the rear brake is much easier to operate, and it actually does something. With the other one, with that oval hole, that reduced the braking function to 0. So these are the things to look for when you're working on brakes. Another thing that is really important, I took this completely apart, and in order to get this drive wheel, this worm gear drive out, and this is for the speedometer cable, it was seized up in here. It would barely rotate, and it was seized over here in the front section, so it sits like this on the inside. So what I had to do, unfortunately, is drill a hole and then have a drift, and I had to tap it out, and it required quite a bit of force. Now, why is this so important? Well, this has to spin freely, and also you need to lubricate the speedometer cable, because this flat end at the end where the cable slides over the inner cable and that starts to rotate and drive the speedometer, these can easily break off. So it's very important that you lubricate this section over here too. But this was seized up, and well, I had to fix that. And this part goes in from the back here. That's where the outer cable is turned on to, connects to. This is a bit loose on the inside, but I also try to find a solution. As you can see now, it's very wobbly, but once it rests to this, the standoff part, now it's rotating nice and smooth. I want to show you what I've done to fix that, at least what I hope to fix. That's something that I'll show in a minute. And another thing that you have to keep in mind when rebuilding the brakes, as said, you have to use grease on this pivot point, but not too much. You don't want to leak it out. This section here, this cup where the speedometer drive is, so that's this wheel and this worm wheel, this worm gear. It needs to be lubricated, and that is sealed off by this seal over here. Anyway, those are my tips for working on brakes. Do this at your own risk, but yeah, be careful, and you now know what to look for. So let's start with reassembling the brakes. So instead of applying the grease with my fingers, I'm gonna use this little bamboo cutlery. It's a fork, and this rear end is real nice to scoop it up. And the grease that I'm using, I hope this somewhat shows the consistency. It doesn't pull too long of string, so it's not super sticky, and also it's not super thick. It has a caramel-like color and consistency, apart from the fact that this is not sticky. So I'm gonna lubricate this little end over here, and this is the first part that's going in. So over here from the back, I'm gonna drop it in, and this is the inside. This is held in place with a grub screw. There's this little cutout over here that I want to align with this hole. There's not too much glare. Let's just hope that the speedometer cable goes on, and I'm immediately going to install this little grub screw. Okay, let's see if this rotates freely. Yeah, it does. Now what I will try to do is use this screw as an adjustment. As you can see, there's a little bit of play. The camera wants to see a look at the back, and I want to get that out so it rests to that point over there, clamping on there. So I'm gonna apply a little bit of Loctite to make sure that this doesn't fall out. Otherwise dirt, water and such can get in. That's not what we want. Now it runs into the gear, and I rotate a little bit back, check if it rotates freely, and it does. So I'm happy with that. Now just a nice scoop of grease on there. Try to keep it inside there. Also something on the drive gear around the circumference, and this intersection that runs on this boss over there. So that's inside diameter, and it rotates in this direction. That feels nice and solid. Now this seal needs to be pushed in. This is quite a loose fit. You can just push it in with your thumbs. And just to be sure, I'm gonna put a little bit, a fingertip of grease on there, on this lip. So if it goes on the wheel, the inside of the brake drum doesn't damage this lip. This is, by the way, the one that was in there. I'm not replacing this. Get the grease in here. What I'm doing, just put it on here. Made sure to clean this off with the wire wheel, and there is this groove in the middle that needs to have plenty of grease on it. And as you can see, you now have a build up over here, and this is somewhat risky because that can get onto the brake shoes. So rotate this, and I'm going to wipe off the excess. There it is. So there's not too much on it, and with that I'm going to lubricate this seating surface for the brake shoe and the pivot on the other side. I'm getting some glove just to prevent grease from getting on the brake liner. I said this is the front brake, which does 90% of the braking, and now it's just a matter of clipping this on. That can also be a little bit tricky because these springs are super tight. What I like to do is to get the springs out on one side. As you can see, these have the hooks to one side, whereas the original Honda springs have one to the other side, making them a bit trickier to install. So, other way around. So, that's one side on, and they are on. Now I'm gonna insert this spring from the top, and there it is. Now that's the front brake completely and fully assembled. The only thing that needs to go on, it sits like this, is this, the brake, we call this the brake key. Don't know what the official name is, gonna look it up. Now, as you can see, there is a little dot over here, and I forgot to mention that, but I will show you. I'm not sure if the camera focus. There's a little dot over here. Now it's the wrong way around. I have to turn this 180 degrees, and then it matches with a marking on this arm over here. There's also a little dot. There it is. And those two need to be aligned. Doesn't really matter. You can adjust them freely, but that's what I want to have. So I'm gonna use this. Not use too much force. We don't want to damage the splines, but it goes one way. Have a rotation around. Now we can align those two. This wants to go on nice aligned. Make sure that this is completely pushed in, and basically this is ready. Now there are special bolts and a nut on there. Maybe if I in the future find the original parts for this, I'm gonna put that on, but this for now works, and most importantly it's safe. Alrighto, don't bend it too much because it can crack over here, but anyway, that's the front brake done. I'm gonna skip filming the rear brake assembly. It's basically the same, so I want to show you when both are done. So as you can see, there's a little bit of rust going on in here, so I'm gonna get some Scotch-Brite, the green one, to clean it up a little bit, and then we can put the brake shoes in. Let's call it quits for today. Whew. It's day 2 of the operations. I want to finish off the frame so I can finish off this episode. Yesterday progress was really slow and my sun allergy hit me real bad. Today is a bit of an overcast day, so I hope can make a bit faster progress today. Anyway, important thing is that I need to fill the front forks before I forget it. In the workshop manual it says to fill them with 120 milliliters of fork oil, or even engine oil is prescribed, 10W40. I have fork oil and I'm gonna fill them first with 100 milliliter. In my experience, the shocks become really stiff already then, and if you overfill it, you blow the seals out faster than you can put new ones in. So that's why I stick with 120 liters. Sorry. I'm using synthetic fork oil. This is 10 weight, and this is something that I've used in the past. And I have a little cup and a 50 millimeter syringe, and just gonna measure it off carefully. As said, you could better put in too little than a little bit too much, because that will immediately blow out the seals in here. And I'll have to do this 6.5 times. And that's 6.5. So I'm sorry about all the glare and the bright lights, but it is what it is. So this is the progress of one day of work, and I'm going to finish off this episode right here. And in the next episode I'm going to install the engine, part of the wiring, and maybe put on the chain already, and then we can start with the electrical wiring, because a lot of changes need to be made there. So that's it for this episode. Well, I hope to upload the next one within 2 weeks. Anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.